Bill Maher just said something that a lot of people on the right have been thinking for a while, and he said it about someone most people assumed he'd never publicly break with. Whoopi Goldberg told her audience that being black in America today is essentially the same as being a woman living under Iran's theocratic regime, and Maher, a lifelong liberal who spent decades needling the right, looked at that claim and said, flatly, it's not just wrong, it's the kind of thing Democrats need to actually do something about. Here's the case he made and why the facts back him up more than they back her. Start with exactly what Goldberg said, because this wasn't a slip of the tongue or an out-of-context clip where she made the comparison directly, on air, defending it when challenged. She argued that the lived experience of being black in America right now is comparable to the experience of being a woman in Iran. A co-host pushed back immediately, laying out Iran's actual legal record, a dedicated morality police force, women executed or imprisoned for showing their hair in public, laws restricting travel, marriage, and custody rights specifically because of gender, and the death penalty for LGBTQ people written directly into Iranian law. Goldberg's response was to reach for America's own historical record of lynching and anti-gay violence as her counter, and this is exactly the kind of comparison Maher has spent years warning his own side about, not because the underlying issue doesn't matter. He's never said that, but because reaching for the most extreme dictatorial example on earth to describe life in a country where the person making the comparison has her own daily television show, a personal fortune, and the total legal freedom to say exactly what she said without a knock on her door the next morning, actually undercuts the case rather than strengthening it. If you're a conservative who's liked Maher precisely because he'll say things liberals aren't supposed to say out loud, this was him doing exactly that, on the exact topic where it's hardest to do. Let's get into the numbers, because this is where the comparison completely falls apart, and it's worth knowing the specifics instead of just the vibe. Iran's government has executed people specifically for consensual same-sex relationships, under a legal code that treats homosexuality as a capital crime. Iranian law mandates that women cover their hair in public, enforced by a morality police unit that made international headlines in 2022 after a woman named Mahsa Amini died in their custody, arrested for wearing her hijab incorrectly, a death that set off a nationwide uprising that the regime crushed with live ammunition, killing several hundred protesters by most human rights estimates and jailing thousands more. None of that is a matter of political interpretation. It's documented by international monitors, by journalists on the ground, and by Iran's own published legal code. There is no equivalent to any of that anywhere in current American law, for any group under any administration in office right now, and pretending otherwise doesn't help anyone actually facing real problems in this country. Now, to give credit where it's due, there's a version of Goldberg's argument that holds up better, and it's worth being fair about it rather than just running up the score. American history absolutely includes a period where the state itself enforced racial terror. Slavery, followed by nearly a century of Jim Crow, with state and local governments turning a blind eye to thousands of lynchings. If she'd been talking about that period specifically, the comparison to state-tolerated violence has real teeth. Her mistake was putting it in the present tense, comparing conditions today, which invited exactly the kind of rebuttal she got, built on today's numbers rather than a historical argument that was actually available to her and much harder to knock down. This is where the guest Maher brought on to make the counter-argument is worth paying attention to, because his story is a live rebuttal all on its own. Texas Congressman Wesley Hunt, a black Republican, pointed out that his own father grew up under Jim Crow segregation, and Hunt himself was later elected to Congress from a majority white district that voted for Trump by a wide margin. That's not just a talking point, it's a demonstration of exactly the kind of legal and political mobility that simply doesn't exist for women under Iran's current system. A woman in Iran can't run for president. She can't overturn the mandatory hijab law through a ballot box because there isn't a real one. She can't out-organize a morality police unit that answers to unelected clerics rather than voters. Hunt's career, whatever you think of his politics, is proof of a system that allows exactly the kind of change Goldberg claims doesn't exist here. And Iran's system, by design, doesn't allow it at all. This connects to something Maher has been been saying consistently for a long time now, well before this particular clash, that a wing of progressive commentary has developed a habit of treating every domestic grievance as functionally identical to the worst human rights abuses anywhere on the planet, no matter how different the actual legal facts are. That's not a conservative talking point Maher borrowed for the occasion. It's been a consistent thread in his own commentary for years, and it's a big part of why conservatives who otherwise disagree with him on plenty else have come to trust him on this specific issue. He's calling it out from inside his own political tribe, which carries more weight than the same criticism coming from Fox News. It's also worth knowing that this reaction wasn't confined to American politics. Iranian dissidents and human rights advocates, people who've actually lived under the system Goldberg was invoking, pushed back publicly and pointedly, arguing that flattening their real, ongoing life or death struggle into a rhetorical device for an unrelated American political argument minimizes what they're actually going through. These are women who are still risking arrest, injury, or worse to fight a system they can't vote out. That's a different and arguably more serious category of pushback than anything coming from the American right, and it deserves to be weighed on its own terms. None of this means America doesn't have real, documented racial disparities worth taking seriously. It does, and the honest, defensible version of that argument was sitting right there the whole time. Black median household wealth remains a fraction of white median wealth. Black Americans are incarcerated at roughly 5 times the rate of white Americans, even after researchers control for underlying crime rates. Housing discrimination, illegal since 1968, has still turned up in federal investigations within the past several years. Any one of those data points makes a serious case for continued attention to real inequality, without needing to borrow the most extreme example available from a country that executes its own citizens for who they love. That's really the whole lesson here, and it's one Maher himself has been making in different forms for years. The strongest version of an argument is usually the honest, specific one, not the one that reaches for the most dramatic comparison in the room. It's worth understanding exactly what the women Goldberg implicitly compared American life to have actually been risking, because it makes the gap even harder to defend. The woman, life, freedom movement that erupted in Iran after Mahsa Amini's death wasn't symbolic protest. It was a sustained uprising against a legal system that mandates specific clothing under threat of arrest, restricts a woman's ability to travel without a male guardian's permission in many circumstances, and limits a woman's courtroom testimony to half the legal weight of a man's under Iran's interpretation of religious law. Protesters were shot in the street. Some were executed after closed trials that international observers widely condemned as lacking basic due process. Those women don't have the option of writing an op-ed, going on a talk show, or organizing a boycott through normal legal channels the way an American citizen can. They're risking their lives for rights that are, quite literally, guaranteed on paper in the United States already. That's the piece of this that should land hardest with anyone who values what actually makes a country free, not whether every outcome is perfectly equal, because no country on earth can claim that, but whether the legal system itself treats citizens as equals under the law and gives them real tools to fight for more when it falls short. America's system, whatever its remaining flaws, gives every citizen the vote, the courts, a free press, and the right to organize and protest without fear of execution. Iran's system denies women all of that by design, as a matter of enforced law, with no legal path to change it from the inside. Collapsing that distinction doesn't honor the seriousness of either country's problems. It just makes it harder to talk clearly about either one, and it's worth being blunt about why this particular moment mattered beyond the usual cable news dust-up. Maher didn't just disagree with Goldberg, he used the moment to make a broader case that a chunk of his own party's most visible media platform has drifted into territory where basic factual comparisons don't survive contact with reality anymore, and that continuing to let that slide is bad for the party's credibility with exactly the kind of persuadable, moderate voters it needs. That's a strategic argument as much as a factual one, and it's the same argument conservative commentators have been making about The View for years. Maher just made it from a seat those commentators don't have, which is why it traveled as far and as fast as it did, even in circles that don't normally give him the time of day. It's also worth pointing out that this fits a broader pattern in Maher's commentary that conservatives have increasingly come to appreciate, even if they still disagree with him on plenty else. He's made similar arguments before about other public figures on the left, reaching for the most extreme comparison available instead of the most accurate one. Whether the topic is policing, immigration enforcement, or foreign policy. The through line in all of it is the same. He thinks his side is doing itself real damage every time it swaps out a defensible, data-backed argument for a maximalist one that collapses the second someone actually checks the facts. That's not a new position for him, and it's exactly why this particular clash with Goldberg landed as hard as it did. It wasn't an isolated jab, it was one more data point in an argument he's been building consistently for years, and one that keeps getting proven right every time a comparison like this one gets tested against the actual record. That's ultimately the reason this specific exchange resonates with an audience that wouldn't normally agree with Maher on much else. It's not that he suddenly discovered conservative talking points, it's that the underlying discipline he's applying, check the actual legal facts before making a comparison, and don't reach for the most extreme available example just because it makes for a stronger soundbite, is the same discipline conservatives have wanted applied consistently across the board for years. When it finally gets applied by someone from inside the other team on a topic as serious as this one, it's worth recognizing for what it actually is, not a political conversion, but a rare, honest application of a standard that should have been there in the first place. There's a bigger picture worth zooming out to here, because this exchange is really a small window into a much larger credibility problem that's been building for a while. Every time a comparison this overstated gets made and then gets dismantled point by point, it makes the next legitimate claim about real inequality just a little bit harder to land with a skeptical audience. That's the actual cost, and it's a cost that falls hardest on the people the original argument was supposed to be helping. If you're someone who genuinely wants Americans to take documented racial disparities seriously, the wealth gap, the incarceration numbers, the lending discrimination, the last thing you want is for the loudest, most visible spokesperson for that cause to hand skeptics an easy, factually indefensible target to shoot at instead. Every viral moment like this one becomes ammunition for the argument that concerns about inequality are exaggerated across the board, even when the specific data points being ignored in the process are perfectly solid on their own. This is also frankly part of why a certain kind of conservative viewer has gravitated toward Maher specifically over the past several years, even while still finding plenty to disagree with him about on taxes, guns, or foreign policy. It's not about ideological agreement, it's about a shared frustration with a media environment that increasingly rewards the most dramatic version of any claim over the most accurate one, regardless of which side is making it. Maher holding his own party's most visible daytime platform to that same standard in real time on national television is exactly the kind of moment that cuts through the usual partisan noise, because it can't be dismissed as just another conservative pundit doing what conservative pundits do. It's someone from inside the tent pointing at a specific factual overreach and refusing to let it slide just because it came from an ally instead of an opponent, and that's really the standard worth applying going forward on both sides of this and every other political argument like it. The strength of a political claim shouldn't depend on how extreme the comparison sounds. It should depend on how well the actual facts hold up once someone bothers to check them. Goldberg had a real defensible argument sitting right there in the documented data on American wealth gaps, incarceration rates, and lending discrimination. She reached instead for a comparison to a regime that executes its own citizens and lost the argument the moment anyone with real information about Iran's legal system pushed back. That's not a lesson about which side of the aisle gets things right more often. It's a lesson about the difference between a claim that survives scrutiny and one that only sounds persuasive until somebody actually checks it. And it's a distinction worth demanding from commentators on every side of the political spectrum, not just the ones you already disagree with. If you're a conservative who respects Maher precisely because he still calls balls and strikes even when it costs him with his own side, this is that instinct working exactly as advertised. And it's worth remembering the next time someone tells you he's just another liberal who won't hold his own team accountable.